Welcome to Historic Jacksonville, Oregon. Jacksonville and its residents played a dominant role in early Oregon history and statehood, and we'll be sharing some of that history with you today. When Oregon was admitted to the Union in 1859, Jacksonville was the largest inland trade center in the new state. It began in the 1850s as a gold boom town, full of miners and merchants and women of ill repute, all seeking a quick fortune. It quickly grew into the largest town in southern Oregon and the hub of regional commerce, society, and government for over half a century. In fact, this entire block has been the site of county and now city government since 1859. This imposing two-story brick and stone Italianate-style edifice became Jacksonville's new city hall in 2016, but it was originally Jackson County's historic courthouse. It was declared the crowning glory of Jacksonville when it was constructed in 1883. Ironically, the new courthouse, the most monumental structure in Jacksonville, was completed the same year that the Oregon and California Railroad bypassed Jacksonville in favor of the Flat Valley floor in Medford. As Jacksonville waned and Medford grew, numerous attempts were undertaken to relocate the county seat to the new business and residential hub. In 1927, Medford won and the county seat was moved. But not before Jacksonville had one last glory moment, when the trial of the D'Entremont brothers attracted nationwide attention. After a 3-year manhunt that extended to Mexico, Canada, and Australia, the 3 D'Entremont brothers were apprehended and charged with the murder of 4 railroad employees during a failed 1923 train holdup attempt in Railroad Tunnel 13 in the Siskiyou Mountains. Billed as the West's last great train robbery, this was the final trial held in the courthouse before all legal business was moved to the newly erected courthouse in Medford. And that was the end of Jacksonville as the hub of southern Oregon. But that loss ultimately became our gain. It preserved much of the original town and enabled Jacksonville to create its historic district, which became the first group of buildings in the West to be registered as a National Historic Landmark. The building next door that now houses Art Presence was originally the county jail. Constructed in 1911, it was the 4th county jail built on that site. The sheriff at the time was August Singler. He died in a 1913 shootout with a wanted man at a cabin near here. Singler was mortally wounded but succeeded in killing his quarry before dying. Singler was the first Oregon sheriff and the first and only Jackson County sheriff to date to be killed in the line of duty. St. Andrew's Methodist Episcopal Church across the corner is one of a handful of churches claiming the title of oldest Protestant church west of the Rockies. It was completed in 1854 with donations from gold miners and gamblers. When preacher Thomas Fletcher Royal was questioned about his willingness to use gambling money to build a house of worship, according to his diary, he replied, "Oh yes, and we would put it to a better use." The church originally faced North 4th Street, but when 5th Street became the main route to Medford, the church fathers turned the whole building around and moved it from the opposite end of the lot. Next door to St. Andrew's is the old Rose Garden, although the garden itself is not old. It was created in 1960 by the Medford Rose Society to showcase rose varieties that originated before 1867, many of which are rare and no longer available. The statue of St. Francis of Assisi was dedicated in 1988. The garden is also a cemetery. When the rector of St. Andrew's, Father Paul Habliston, died in 1991, the city gave special permission for his cremated remains to be buried in the Rose Garden. His wife's remains later joined him. Today, the garden is a place where you can walk, sit, and meditate. And the second church built in Jacksonville is only a block away. St. Joseph's Catholic Church, with its Gothic-style pointed arched windows and door, became the first Catholic parish church built in southern Oregon, after a missionary priest reported having counted 105 Catholics in the Rogue Valley in 1855, and is the oldest Catholic church still standing in this part of the state. The church was intended to serve the needs of not only Jacksonville, but all of the mining districts for 60 or 70 miles. Fire was a significant hazard in early Jacksonville, and multiple fires shaped the historic district we're exploring. So let's stop by Jacksonville's fire station. Our modern fire station, completed in 2022, incorporates a portion of a 1950s building that served as both fire station and, for a number of years, Jacksonville's city administrative offices. However, prior to 1888, this was the site of a Chinese hotel. While called a hotel, it was busted by the police for operating as a brothel and opium den. Records show that major fires destroyed portions of early Jacksonville every few years. Fire was the impetus for the city's fathers to enact a law in 1878 that required commercial buildings to be built in brick. However, as early as 1854, local contractors promoted fireproof brick buildings. Their inspiration was fire insurance. Early on, insurance companies charged the owners of wooden structures or the buildings adjacent to them a premium rate. Across the street is the Mary Ann Harris Chambers House. As settlers migrated to southern Oregon, conflict with the Native Americans who already lived here became inevitable. When Mary Ann and George Harris and their two children, Sophie and David, arrived in Oregon in 1853, they staked a claim on a homestead about 8 miles north of what is now Grants Pass. A war party of Indians attacked the Harris homestead during the 1855 Rogue Indian Wars. White settlers had attacked the Indian village when the Braves were absent, killing women, children, and elders, and the Indians were seeking revenge. Accounts vary, but all agree that George Harris was killed and Sophie was wounded. David, who was sent to bring help, was never seen again. Mary Ann held off the attack for over 5 hours. Sophie helped load and reload the family's guns, while Mary Ann changed positions inside the house to give the impression that several people were firing. At one point, she supposedly counted 21 natives, some displaying the scalps of neighbors murdered a few hours earlier. Around mid-afternoon, the Indians apparently became bored with the stalemate and continued their trail of murder and mayhem at a neighbor's house. Shortly thereafter, Mary Ann and Sophie moved to this house in Jacksonville, where Mary Ann took in boarders to pay the bills. One of those boarders was John Love, which brings us to the Love House, another house at this intersection. John Love was a leading figure in Jacksonville's business and civic life. He was in the tin plate and sheet iron business, in other words, hardware, and served on the town council. He also plotted Jacksonville's historic cemetery. In 1859, his mother was the first person buried in the cemetery, even though it was not officially opened. Love became enamored with the charms of Sophie Harris, and when she turned 16, he married her. Around 1867, he built this house for his growing family. The couple had 4 children, but the marriage was short-lived. Love died 7 years later from tuberculosis. His wife Sophie and their daughter Maggie, they died within days of each other in the smallpox epidemic of 1868-69. At various times, epidemics ravaged the populations of towns and cities throughout the country. Smallpox, influenza, typhoid fever, cholera, measles, diphtheria, scarlet fever, and tuberculosis. It wasn't until the late 1800s that doctors discovered germs and bacteria and began developing vaccines to protect against them. Another block will take us to the Jacksonville Visitors Center in the original Rogue River Valley Railroad Depot. The building that now serves as Jacksonville's Visitors Center and Chamber of Commerce was originally the depot for the Rogue River Valley Railway. If you were standing here in the 1890s, you would see 13-year-old John Barnum, the nation's youngest conductor. For years, Jacksonville looked forward to the coming of the railroad, and businesses and residents naturally assumed it would be routed through the region's hub. However, when the railroad bypassed Jacksonville, a major economic and political shift occurred that signaled the beginning of the end of Jacksonville's regional importance. In an attempt to retain the town's status and revive the economy, residents funded the spur rail line to connect the city to the main railroad in Medford. And in 1891, the Rogue River Valley Railway's small steam locomotive pulled into the Jacksonville depot. But it was too little, too late. Residents and merchants relocated to the growing town of Medford. The Rogue River Valley Railway could not maintain a profit, much less revive Jacksonville's economy. When the Great Depression of 1929 followed on the heels of the relocation of the county seat to Medford, Jacksonville became the wrong side of the tracks. However, the town's decline also proved to be its salvation, preserving the historic buildings, homes, and character that you're seeing today. So let's explore a little more of it. Many buildings have stood on the site of the Telephone Exchange Building and Post Office, but this location was originally home to David Lynn's furniture shop, factory, and sawmill. Lynn was the pioneer who constructed most of Jacksonville's wooden buildings, along with furnishings for their interiors. David was also the town coffin maker, and most of the people buried in the Jacksonville Cemetery in the late 1800s were laid to rest in Lynn's coffins. In 1888, an arsonist torched David Lynn's sawmill. The resulting fire wiped out much of this end of town, including the mill, the town's original business center, which had become the Chinese Quarter, and a neighbor's house located where the visitor center now stands. At the corner of Oregon and California streets is Jacksonville's Masonic Hall. Warren Lodge No. 10 of the ancient Free and Accepted Masons was founded in 1855, the first Masonic order south of Salem. The current temple, completed in 1877, is the oldest temple structure in Oregon in continuous use as a Masonic meeting hall. The Masons acquired the property after one of Jacksonville's major fires wiped out one of the earliest and certainly one of the most notorious landmarks in the early mining community, the El Dorado Saloon. From as early as 1852, gamblers, courtesans, and others seeking to part miners from their gold had flocked to the El Dorado. You've probably gotten the idea that fire has played a significant role in Jacksonville's history and architecture. And fire is why the McCulley Building is outfitted with heavy iron shutters on all the windows and doors. When Dr. John McCulley constructed this building in 1856, it was the first two-story building erected in Jacksonville. The ground floor housed a series of shops. The second story was home to McCulley's Theater and also served as the local Jewish synagogue. In 1861, McCulley leased the second floor to the newly formed local chapter of the International Order of Oddfellows. That same year, McCulley left Jacksonville in disrepute after his real estate speculations left him deeply in debt. The Oddfellows subsequently acquired ownership of the building, and in 1867, it was dedicated as Jacksonville's Oddfellows Hall. It has been used for their meetings ever since. Sandwiched in between the Oddfellows and Masonic halls is the Table Rock Billiard Saloon. This 1860 brick building replaced a wooden structure that had housed another saloon. In case you're counting, at one time Jacksonville supposedly had 36 saloons. But while saloons came and went, the Table Rock Saloon prospered for over 60 years under the ownership of German immigrant Hermann von Helms and his son. Helms's saloon was also Jacksonville's first museum. Von Helms collected fossils and oddities to attract a clientele that then stayed for his lager. And for many years, the saloon functioned as an informal social and political headquarters, home to business deals, court decisions, and even trials. Across the street is the Orth Building, erected in 1872 by German-born butcher John Orth. Prior to the building's construction, Orth's butcher shop had occupied a wooden frame building on the same site. This structure once served as the location of a gym, the Palmetto Bowling Saloon, the Old City Brewery, and the City Drugstore, which was both pharmacy and hospital. Jacksonville's 1881 Old City Hall was the oldest government building in Oregon to remain in continuous use until 2020, when the city moved all government functions to New City Hall, the 1883 Jackson County Courthouse. This intersection of South Oregon and Main Streets was the heart of Jacksonville's original business district. And Old City Hall stands on the site of the first brick building in town, the 1854 Maury and Davis Dry Goods Store. The building is now the home base of Jacksonville's Museum Without Walls, offering an overview of the town's history along with the many ways in which you can explore our National Historic Landmark District. This block of West Main Street was the center of Jacksonville's original business district. The first stores in Jacksonville were wooden structures. As the 1- and 2-story wood frame stores were replaced by brick buildings, the business center shifted over to California Street. Chinese immigrants from San Francisco took over the original structures, and Jacksonville became home to the first Chinatown in Oregon. The Chinese came to mine gold, then stayed to build the railroad. They also owned businesses, had homes, and worked doing cooking, laundry, and housekeeping. However, they were always discriminated against. They could not stake a gold claim, although they could buy an existing one. They had to pay more taxes and fees than white settlers. Then, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act prohibited any more Chinese laborers from immigrating to the U.S. and denied citizenship to those already living here. It also made many of the Chinese residents unable to support themselves. Many returned to China, and Jacksonville's Chinatown became derelict and mostly deserted. Most of Jacksonville's Chinese Quarter burned in the fire of 1888 that started at David Lynn's furniture factory. One of the individuals who did help the Chinese community was their neighbor, Peter Britt. Britt Park, which includes both the Britt Gardens and Britt Festival grounds, was once the homestead of Peter Britt and his family. Britt is the Swiss pioneer photographer who documented life in the Rogue Valley during the late 1800s. His photographs contributed to Jacksonville acquiring National Historic Landmark status and to Crater Lake being named Oregon's only national park. But Britt was more than a photographer. He could be called a Renaissance man. He was a meteorologist, beekeeper, and rancher. He is credited with founding the commercial wine, orchard, and horticulture industries in southern Oregon. He experimented with over 200 varieties of grapes to see what would grow best in the region and bottled and sold his wines as far away as Wyoming. He cultivated peaches, apples, and pears and sold them commercially. He surrounded his home with ornamental shrubs, exotic trees, and unusual botanical specimens. Britt Park was featured in Northwest promotional publications in the late 1800s. By the turn of the century, Britt Gardens had become a Pacific Northwest tourist destination and remained so well into the mid-1900s when the last family member died. The home was destroyed by fire in 1960. Today, you can see a reconstructed foundation of Peter Britt's house, and the Jacksonville Boosters Club continues to restore many of Britt's early plantings. Let's head back downhill. We visited the Table Rock Saloon, the business of Hermann von Helms. The von in Helms' name infers a royal German lineage. Our next stop, his home, may not be royal, but it is certainly classy. Von Helms built this house in 1878. Like many others, he expanded on an existing structure, a log cabin he had built in 1856, converting it to the kitchen and pantry of the new design. Helms's 1862 marriage to Augusta Engelbrecht was arranged through connections in the Northern California and Southern Oregon German communities. The couple met for the first time the day before they wed. The couple enjoyed a successful marriage and business ventures, but suffered a number of personal tragedies. Hermann and Augusta lost 3 of their 8 children to typhoid, and one daughter was murdered by her brother-in-law. Another example of Jacksonville prosperity is the John Orth House. Built in 1880, it incorporates Victorian Italianate architecture. This was the home of German-born John Orth, the very successful town butcher who constructed the Orth Building we saw earlier. Fireproof brick became a big selling point in pioneer Jacksonville. The next building, currently occupied by a contemporary Jacksonville saloon, was built for one of the town's earliest and longest-term investors in fireproof brick buildings, Irishman Patrick J. Ryan. Built about 1865, of all the buildings in Jacksonville, it may have housed the greatest variety of businesses: hotels, stores, saloons, and residences. More recently, it was the home of Robbie Collins, the individual who led the effort to prevent a proposed state highway from taking out 11 of Jacksonville's historical buildings. He then spearheaded the organization that established the city's National Historic Landmark status in the 1960s. Collins went on to become an internationally known historic preservationist. The two-story brick building at the southwest corner of 3rd and California Streets was erected in 1884 for the Oregonian Pocahontas Tribe Number 1 of the International Order of the Redmen. The Redmen fraternal societies claim to be the oldest secret order founded in America, with roots going back to the Sons of Liberty and the Boston Tea Party. Jacksonville's tribe was organized in 1870 and was one of the city's most prominent social and civic organizations for the next 2 decades. Members were largely of German origin, and early records were kept in German. German would have been the second language heard most frequently on the streets of early Jacksonville, since almost 1/3 of the town's residents were German, Austrian, or Swiss German. These settlers had a tremendous influence on early town life. In addition to being prominent business owners and elected officials, they built a gymnasium, opened a brewery, organized a singing club and town band, and hosted regular community gatherings. Jacksonville was obviously a melting pot. So far, we've mentioned German, Chinese, and Irish. There were also English, Scottish, Dutch, Portuguese, Samoan, and French that we know of. And a French woman is the subject of our next story. Across the street is the U.S. Hotel, one of the town's major historic buildings, both in size and social importance. The building looks much as it did when local brick mason George Holt constructed it in the late 1870s for his wife, hotel proprietress Madame Jeanne de Rebaume. De Rebaume, who had established the Franco-American Hotel as a famous regional hostelry, longed for a grand brick hotel. It was even rumored that she married Holt to fulfill her dream. The hotel was completed in May of 1880, just in time for the visit of President Rutherford B. Hayes. The town and de Rebaume made it a grand occasion with brass bands, speeches, and de Rebaume's best food and wine. She had even created suites of rooms for all the president's party and priced everything accordingly, higher than the top hotels in San Francisco. The next morning, she was questioned about the amount of the bill and told that they did not want to buy the hotel, they only wanted to rent rooms. She replied that the President of the United States could afford to pay a little more than the common people. At any rate, the bill was paid, and the U.S. Hotel continued to be a centerpiece of Jacksonville's business and social life. Also across 3rd Street is the Beekman Bank. It was constructed in 1863 and is the oldest wooden commercial building still standing on California Street, the only one to survive Jacksonville's numerous fires, mainly due to its proximity to one of the town's wells. Location, location, location. Cornelius Beekman had come to Jacksonville 10 years earlier as an express rider for Cram Rogers and Company, carrying gold dust, parcels, and letters over the Siskiyou Mountains to Wairika 2 or 3 times a week. When Cram Rogers failed in 1856, Beekman purchased their Jacksonville stables and corral for $100 and established Beekman's Express. He operated out of a 1-story structure that he shared with Dr. Charles Brooks Drug Store. The wooden building on this corner is a reconstruction. That same year, Beekman bought a safe and opened a gold dust office, the oldest financial institution in the Pacific Northwest. When he constructed his new building, he retired as an express rider and became the Wells Fargo agent for the next 42 years. Beekman ran his bank until 1912. During that time, virtually all the gold discovered in this mining district passed over his counter, about $40 million worth at the time, over $1 billion in today's value. Our next to the last stop is just 2 blocks east on California Street. This was once the home of Jane and John McCauley. You learned about John McCauley earlier on the tour. When he had this home built, he was a real estate developer, investor, and Oregon territorial legislator. John considered himself a man of prominence, deserving of a residence fitting his position. When it was constructed in 1861, it was considered the finest home in town. But John was in debt, over his head, and in conflict with his creditors. He fled Jacksonville in early 1862, leaving his wife Jane with 3 small children and a large amount of debt. Jane McCauley rescued what investment she could. She baked and sold bread and pies to the local miners until she had enough money to open a school. Her school became the main high school for most of the town's wealthier children, and everyone in Jacksonville was taught to never mention John McCauley's name in her presence. We've almost completed our circuit, so let's head back to the historic courthouse, now New City Hall, both the end and the beginning of our Jacksonville story. Learn about all of our Jacksonville tours at historicjacksonville.org. We offer seasonal tours of the 1863 Beekman Bank and the 1870s Beekman House, owned by Jacksonville's richest and most prominent pioneer family. You can learn about the spirits that still linger in Jacksonville's historic buildings on one of our haunted history tours, and you can visit today's tour sites in person on our summer Saturday walkthrough history tours. You can also continue your virtual tour of Jacksonville. Our Historic District Highlights blog shares new sites and provides more information on some of the places we visited today. Our Thirsty Thursday Saloon series tours you through many of Jacksonville's alleged 36 saloons. Beekman Bank Nuggets takes you behind the counter of the oldest financial institution in the Pacific Northwest, sharing artifacts and stories of 19th century banking practices. And Mrs. Beekman Invites You to Call provides a 1912 guided tour of the 1873 Beekman House, home to the richest and most prominent of Jacksonville's pioneer families, led by Mrs. Julia Beekman herself. Jacksonville's pets are also sharing local history in our Walkabout Wednesday series. We offer daily Jacksonville history trivia on Facebook and Instagram. And we continue to add more tours, programs, and events that bring history to life and life to history.